All right, so we've got this interview here from Kristen Welker. She interviewed Thomas Massie. Now, this should be an interesting interview because of all the interviews that I've watched of Kristen Welker since I've started streaming, she is not a she's not easy on the people that she interviews. She's not an easy interviewer. However, she's interviewing someone who is an enemy of Donald Trump. And let me just explain this really briefly. Thomas Massie is an enemy of Donald Trump specifically because Thomas Massie is not one of those MAGA loyalists. He is not marching lockstep with whatever Donald Trump wants him to do. He is a principled libertarian, first and foremost, who wants the United States of America to return to having limited government, having limited scope, and not ballooning and increasing the national debt. Sorry, it just popped up there. And so because of that puts him in odds with Donald Trump, who loves to balloon the scope and the scale of the government, right? So Donald Trump ran on, I'm gonna get rid of the debt or whatever. That was a lie. And I called that out during the presidential election, and I was proven to be right. Donald Trump has not done anything to decrease the deficit that I'm aware of. So I'm really interested to see how Thomas Massie responds to Donald Trump's repeated attacks. You know, Trump has backed the challenger of Thomas Massie because he wants Thomas Massie to lose. He's declared Thomas Massie an enemy. But anyways, let's get into this.
President Trump's influence over the Republican Party is about to face another set of key tests. Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy and Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie both face Trump-backed primary challengers in the coming days. They're the latest targets in the president's effort this cycle to oust incumbent members of his own party that he's deemed insufficiently supportive of his agenda. Most recently in Indiana, 5 out of 7 Republicans who had opposed the president's redistricting push were defeated in their primaries. Louisiana Republican Senator Bill Cassidy originally drew President Trump's ire as one of the few Republican senators who voted to convict him during his impeachment trial after the January 6th riot. Cassidy faces 2 challengers in tomorrow's primary race, State Treasurer John Fleming and Congresswoman Julia Letlow, who has Donald Trump's endorsement, a fact she's touted heavily in campaign ads.
Cassidy and Fleming, never Trumpers, we'll never ever vote for.
I'm thrilled to give my complete and total endorsement to your next United States Senator from Louisiana, Julia Letlow.
While President Trump is backing Letlow, a Trump political advisor recently told NBC News the president and his advisors are more focused on defeating Kentucky Republican Thomas Massie. That primary is coming up on Tuesday, with Massie facing a challenge from his Trump-backed opponent, Ed Galrein. Massie spoke to my colleague, Julie Sirkin, about why he thinks his race is a referendum for his party.
I vote with the party 90% of the time, but there's 10% of the time where I think my constituents are better served by a different vote. If more people would speak up, and I think that is, you're getting to the nub of why they're attacking me and why this is the most expensive race in the history of Congress, congressional primaries. It's because they want everybody else to go along to get along. And if they let one guy come up here and vote his conscience and vote the way he campaigned and vote for his constituents instead of rubber stamping the party menu that day, then there might be others who are encouraged to do that. And
right. Trump loves people who are loyal to him. And Thomas Massie's sort of revolt against that, Trump perceives as a threat, regardless of whether or not I think that's an actual threat.
And so that's why I'm fighting so hard. This is a fight worth winning. It's a national referendum. There'll be international cameras at my election day victory party because it has ramifications.
Congressman Massie's race is just one of several key primary races we will be watching on Tuesday. Joining me now is the panel, Kadia Goba, politics reporter for Notice, Chuck Rocha, Democratic strategist and president of Solidarity Strategies, and Republican strategist Matt Gorman. He is also an NBC News contributor. Thanks to all of you for being here as we are about to head into an exciting series of primary races, starting with Saturday night.
Wait, is there no
Kadia,
interview?
let me
I thought that
start with you.
I thought there'd be an interview with Thomas Massie. Bruh. That thumbnail made it seem like there was an interview. Okay, never mind. It's fine now.
In this Cassidy race, how much jeopardy is he in? Could Julia Letlow pull off a win, or is this going to go to a runoff? How do you see it?
Yeah, you know, polling a month ago suggested that he wasn't doing well. Cassidy was about a few points under Letlow, as well as Fleming. He's polling under them. So it'll be interesting, but at the same time, there's about 22% of voters who are undecided. So it'll be
a lot of
interesting
voters.
To see
22%?
Voters who are undecided. It'll be interesting, but at the same time, there's about 22% of.
That's a huge margin. That's like enough to come in like second or third place in one of these elections. Undecided. That's massive. I have been following politics for quite a while, and to be fair, I don't always follow the polls for these local state elections, but I don't think I've ever seen like a 22% undecided poll number before.
Voters who are undecided. So it'll be interesting to see where that 22% falls, right? Like, has the president's decision around gas prices impacted some of their decision? Are they going, this is obviously going to be a vote for the president or against the president, I think, and it will be between his endorsed candidate and whether or not Cassidy has a chance.
Yeah, and we're seeing a similar dynamic play out with the race for Thomas Massie's seat. He says he's voted with Republicans 90% of the time, but boy, it's hard to think of a Republican congressman who's been more outspoken and broken with President Trump on more issues publicly. The Epstein files, voting against the big, beautiful bill. Matt, how do you see that race playing out with Ed Galrine?
Yeah, I mean, I think Massie's in a lot of trouble. You can't at 1 minute say, accuse the Trump administration of being, quote, the Epstein administration, as Thomas Massie has done, and then the next breath brag how much you vote with Donald Trump. I think it's a little disingenuous. But look, I think, you know, Massie had an advantage to start. Galrine's come on. I think, you know, especially this will be the only big primary in Kentucky because you don't really have as much of a competitive Senate race driving a ton of turnout, especially in Massie's district. So I think, you know, Massie is going to be in a lot of trouble. Now, what I'm curious about is if he goes down, what does he do for the next, 5 months or so? They still essentially need his presence in Congress.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say, it's not disingenuous to talk about how you voted with the GOP like 80 or 90% of the time, but you're, criticizing Donald Trump for his handling of the Epstein files. If that's true, right? It is true that he votes with Republicans for like 80 or 90% of the time. And it is true that he does not support how Donald Trump's administration has handled the Epstein files, as do most Americans, actually. So it's not disingenuous at all. It's just genuous.
That's a great question. What are you going to be watching for, Chuck?
Well, first of all, there's nothing like the smell of Republicans fighting each other in the afternoon here in Washington, D.C. Us Democrats love that. Let me explain what I mean by that, is that every dollar that's spent in this primary in Kentucky or in a primary in Louisiana, where these folks don't have to be spending money against each other, they could be spending on beating Democrats. So it's a good thing for the Democrats. The next point is this Massie thing has become the most expensive primary in the history of Kentucky. And the last thing in Louisiana we should remind everybody is that it's a top two system. There's a chance that the incumbent does not even make the runoff.
Yeah. Right.
But there's a lot of craziness going on right now.
The one thing I disagree with is that, this is good for Democrats. This is not good for Democrats because it's very important to spend a lot of money on, backing the right candidate for the nominee, for the party nominee. And the reason why is because the right nominee will determine whether or not you win or lose. Donald Trump has actually backed losing horses in the past for nomination, right? He's been able to get a solid track record of, if I back this person will be the nominee. Now, does that mean that person is going to win a general election? That is a little bit mixed. So it's actually not great for Democrats that so much money is being spent here. Although I do think it's actually good for Democrats if Trump's picks win, because a lot of people have like a more negative view of Trump. Well, no, not more negative, but a lot of people have a negative view of Trump right now, especially with gas prices being high and the Iran conflict. So because of all of that, people are probably going to look at this being a vote up over gas prices more than anything else, which is why I don't think the timing of this conflict with Iran was really great in terms of like political moves.
What about that point about the dollars and cents of this, Matt, and the concern? And I've spoken to some Republicans who say we are having to put money into races that we don't necessarily.
35 million in Indiana.
Well, Massie already votes like a Democrat, so we're essentially putting money to
Only
defeat
10% of
to
the
beat a
time.
Democrat. That's pretty big, 10%. You just mentioned it there. I mean, procedural votes, congratulations. So again, we can defeat Thomas Massie there. I think the other part is, Chuck does make a point on this. There is a very good chance that Cassie does not make the runoff. I mean, Fleming has come on strong. Letlow struggled to start her campaign, but has escalated. And again, Fleming's a former congressman in and of itself. He's not a nobody. He actually served in the seat Mike Johnson took over for. So that is something to watch very closely. A Letlow versus Fleming runoff is certainly not out of the question. Where Cassidy, again, nowhere to be found.
Look, it's really, really important to know that this is a Saturday election. It's a Republican primary. There's one place Donald Trump is still a superstar, and that's in a Republican low turnout primary. That means these folks love Donald Trump. That's why it's not too good for Cassidy.
Kadia, let's talk about Georgia. A lot to talk about there. We've got the Senate race there. Brian Kemp, the governor, supporting Derek Dooley. He's the former football coach who's facing off against two members of Congress. The race to try to unseat Jon Ossoff, the Democrat there. What are you going to be watching for?
Obviously, who is the next candidate to run against Ossoff? Many people have kind of positioned themselves as,
Is she good? Is she good?
Many
who Jon Ossoff, the two members of Congress, support to talk about there. We've got the Senate race. Kadia, let's talk about Georgia. A lot to talk about there. We've got the Senate race there. Brian Kemp, the governor, supporting Derek Dooley. He's the former football coach who's facing off against two members of Congress. The race to try to unseat Jon Ossoff, the Democrat there. What are you going to be watching for?
Obviously, who is the next candidate to run against Ossoff? Many people have kind of positioned themselves as, Dooley, backed by the governor, right, is a lot of people are favoring Dooley. It'll be interesting to see where Collins pulls off. And obviously, a lot of people I talk to want to see a Collins run against Ossoff, clearly, but it doesn't seem like it might. It'll be interesting to see if it goes that way. It's not clear that it will, but I'm hearing a lot of people are starting to look at how this general election might face off, and I think more resources are going to Dooley at this point.
Well, and we actually have some sound. Let's listen to Brian Kemp and
She was struggling. She was struggling there. The producers and Kristen Welker have saved this poor woman.
This race.
It's time we send people up to D.C. with some common sense that represent our values, but most importantly, what I'm telling voters is going up there for the right reasons, and that's to work with others to deliver results. That's what has been failing up in Washington, D.C., and that's why we need a political outsider.
I have a very strong belief it's going to take a political outsider to beat Jon Ossoff in this race, just like Dave McCormick did in Pennsylvania, Bernie Moreno did in Ohio, Tim Sheehy did in Montana. That's why we're working so hard for Derek.
Matt, what do you make of this? I mean, Kadia's laid out the stakes. I mean, how do you see this playing out? Is this going to go to a runoff?
I think it's very likely to go to a runoff. The fight is between, I think, Buddy Carter or Derek Dooley. Derek Dooley struggled for a time. He had the Kemp machine behind him. There is a thought that if he can get to a runoff, that's where it actually can mobilize and overtake Collins a little bit. But I think the question is, can he get to that second position?
Democrats are pretty confident in Jon Ossoff right now, Chuck, and yet the governor clearly putting all of his political capital behind his candidate, and once this goes to a general election, you anticipate we'll see the same.
The #1 grassroots fundraiser in the Democratic Party for the last 18 months have been Jon Ossoff. That means folks have been giving him money, $5, $10, $20 at a time. He's raised an incredible amount of money, and as an incumbent, that's what you should do. Going back to this Republican runoff, I'll go back to my previous statement of Donald Trump is still very popular in this, and in a Republican primary, you're only going to have these right of the right voters. And in a runoff, if it goes that far, it's just like Texas. It's even more of the right of the right. Regular folks don't vote in a turnout.
What's so fascinating about Georgia, Matt, are the dynamics between President Trump and some of these Georgia Republicans, and the fact that that is adding this extra layer to so many of these races, including the gubernatorial.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Kemp and Trump have buried a lot of the hatchet over the last 6 years, especially in the last 2 years.
But you got Raffensperger.
Raffensperger's a different case, I think. And again, we'll see. I believe he's running as well, not for Senate, obviously, but from other positions. So we'll see how that goes. You know, again, I think this is a race that Republicans recognize they're the underdog going to the general election, but are hopeful maybe they can make it a race and see what happens.
Watch the suburbs around Atlanta. Watch the Democrat and Republican turnout. See what the turnout looks like compared to each other. Those suburbs used to be ruby red. They've turned purple and now are leaning very much blue. That's where this election's won and lost in November.
All right, we're going to watch it now closely. Thank you all for a great Friday conversation, Kadia, Chuck, and Matt. Tune in tomorrow for special coverage of the Louisiana midterm primaries with the great Steve Kornacki at the big board starting at 9 p.m. Eastern on NBCNews.com. And then you don't want to miss this. On Tuesday, I'll be joined by my colleagues Hallie Jackson, Steve Kornacki, and our team of reporters for special primary coverage as the results come in. Matt Gorman's going to be there with me. It all kicks off at 6:30 Eastern right here on NBC News Now.
Now, I do think that what's going to be a massive predictor of how these elections go is whether or not Donald Trump is able to get the Strait of Hormuz open. I think that if Donald Trump is able to get the Strait of Hormuz open before these elections happen, that changes the game. So look for that as well as an indicator for how these elections could sway. They're talking about elections going into runoffs because they expect these elections to be very close. I think that get the Strait of Hormuz open, and that actually could limit the possibility that some of these elections go into runoffs rather than just being won by Republicans outright. But I did find it interesting that Republicans are more likely to vote in runoffs. I didn't know that. So that's going to be a good sign as well for Republicans if these elections end up going into runoffs.